And welcome back to Moving Conversations. This is Brian Ritchie. I've got with me, as always, Nora St. John. How you doing, Nora?
Very well, Brian. How are you doing? Is spring popping out there in Washington, D.C.? It's
It
popping
actually
here.
is. It is. We got the cherry blossoms. My son
Oh,
literally texted me. They're doing a thing with the Smithsonian today. So, or, they're going to various museums. So they were driving down and he sent a few pictures of the cherry blossoms. So I said, yep, spring has sprung here. It sure
oh,
has.
that's awesome.
Yeah, so it's nice. It's not quite warm yet, but soon. Let's
You,
just
you
say
know you know
soon
it's
it should
coming
be.
though. You know it's
Yes,
coming.
I hope. I hope. I need some warmth. I need a little bit of warmth. It's been too cold. It's been a little too chilly. So for the last couple of weeks, we've been talking a lot about the foot, the ankle, but we haven't really dove into much of the pathology, specific pathologies of the lower leg. So I thought this would be a good opportunity for us to kind of spend an episode and dive into those specifically and talk about maybe some strategies for that. But
Mhm.
before we do that, let me remind everybody, do us a favor, hit that like and subscribe button, and please comment. Tell us what you like, what you don't like. Tell us, what your favorite exercise is for this, for lower leg. We'd really appreciate it. And you can always reach us on Instagram through our DMs, through Moving Convos, as well as through Gmail. Movingconvos@gmail.com is the best way to get in touch with us. And all of our socials are in the show notes. So that being said, let us jump in and talk about some of the different pathologies of the lower leg.
All right. So some key things. One of the most common things is, and we'll start with kind of the simplest and the most common, is an ankle sprain.
Oh, yeah.
I was reading up on ankle sprains for one of the things I've been working on, and it was basically like this may be the most common injury ever, period. And the thing is, the statistics aren't accurate because most people don't go to the doctor for an ankle sprain, right? They just get
Yeah.
one, they limp around for a few days or a few weeks or whatever, and then it gets better. So
Yep.
ankle sprains are one of those things that are super, super common and can lead to some complications actually
Oh,
over
yeah.
time if it's not well taken care of. And what is an ankle sprain, Brian? So let's describe an ankle sprain. What's happening there?
Well, depending on what type it is, the ankle sprain basically is an overstretching of the ligament. Usually we go into I'm going to tell you how it happened to me many, many times. I've had three major ones. Is I missed a step and hit my heel, my toe went down, and I rolled my ankle under.
Mm-hmm.
And with
So
my entire
roll
body
under.
weight, yep, my entire body weight came down on it. I heard a pop, uh, and I couldn't put weight on it. It immediately inflamed, and basically I overstretched the ligaments. And you know, when it happens when you're young and it happens once, hey, no problem. Things come back, and usually after a period of time of immobilization and then strengthening, it'll come back. But repeatedly, that's where it's a different story. And with ankle sprains, that can happen a lot.
Once that ankle gets unstable, it will tend to want to do that same thing again. I know many clients and friends and myself too, who my personal one was landing on the side of my ankle on a trampoline
Oh,
when I was about
ooh.
12. Yeah, that wasn't good. That wasn't good. Yeah, that hurt. I was
Well,
on crutches for about a week on that one. But I mean, I have full ankle everything now. So again, I was 12, so that helps everything.
yeah.
But again, once that ankle gets unstable, so once those ligaments, remember, ligaments are supposed to hold us. They're, I think of them as range limiters or range allowers, right?
Right.
They're a certain length, and when they get torn, that usually means they get a little longer. Just like if you take a fabric and you cut it, it's going to get a little longer, be able to stretch a little farther, which means you don't have so much stability there, because that's the whole point of ligaments, is keeping you from going too far.
Yep.
Um, and so once that gets loose, then the ankle gets a little less stable, etc. So a couple things about ankle sprains. One is again an inversion ankle sprain. So that's where you roll to the outside of your foot. And Brian heard a pop. So when you have a ligament damage, it can just be a stretch. It can
Mm-hmm.
tear a few fibers. It can tear more fibers, or it can actually sever the ligament. And those are the differences in terms of the degree of the sprain. So that's kind of important to know. If the ligament's no longer there, and then you have to
Mm-hmm.
stabilize a little more. So ligament's still there. You have some chance over time of that ligament healing up a bit, scarring up a bit, and getting a little more stable over time. But if it's all the way torn, it's gone.
You're kind of done. Yeah, you're kind of done with that. Yeah, mine didn't tear. I was in my early 20s. And believe it or not, I was coming down a flight of stairs and I was holding my laundry. I was coming out of my mom's house because I was in
Classic.
college. So, yes, had a big thing of laundry. I couldn't see the steps. And I miscounted.
Mm.
And I thought I was at the last step. I wasn't. So I strode a little too far, hit my heel, toe went down. I came down on it, landed on top of the laundry. That broke my fall. So the rest of me was fine. I just couldn't walk.
Yeah.
And the unfortunate thing is, University of Hawaii, my parking situation, I had to park about a mile away from from where I was staying. So I had to walk in, ride my bike, and there was a lot of discomfort for a long period of time. It took a long time for the swelling to come down and the healing.
Mhm.
And in my situation, and I've had this happen with a number of people, is immobilization actually did help. They put an air cast on me, because normally I don't go to the doctor, but this was so bad and it swelled up so much that I said, I got to get this taken care of. They put an air cast on me, which I got to say helped, because as soon as they did that, believe it or not, it gave me just enough lateral support. I still had flexion and extension, but it gave me enough lateral support that I could ride my bike. I could walk. I could do what I needed to. I was still uncomfortable. Weight bearing still was uncomfortable and hurt some, but it wasn't the same. If I took that off and tried to take a step, the instability made it hurt way more. So for me, just getting it to be stable for a period of time with the air cast made all the difference in the world. I got to tell you.
With that amount of instability, I'm surprised there wasn't a ligament tear.
They did remember this was a few years ago.
Yeah.
So, they didn't do an MRI. He did a typical thing after an ankle sprain is there's a drawer test that you can do, much like the knee, where you stabilize the foot and you actually try and anteriorly move or try and move the ankle.
Slide the tibia back and forth.
Yeah. And I had no significant slack at that point. So I was surprised too, because I swear I heard a pop, but again, internally through my, like cracking a knuckle and things like that, who knows how loud it was audibly to anyone around me, but it sounded loud to me, landing on it. But yeah, and I was probably 270 pounds at the time, 260. So I was that was a lot of weight coming down on it. I was kind of surprised it didn't tear too. And the doctor was, and he said, no, everything seems to be intact. But again, maybe an MRI should have been done. Who knows? Second guessing now. Who knows?
And does it really matter? Like, they're not going to do surgery. So, it's going to heal the way it heals. So I'm not sure that necessarily matters, but it just, that kind of instability usually especially instability seems to be the problem as opposed to just swelling. Because for most people, or for a lot of my clients, it just swells up and the swelling produces pain. For one thing, the instability does too, the damage does to some extent. A lot of it, just like the ankle can swell up like a basketball, and just be really, really tender and full of liquid. And there's not a lot of space in there for that liquid to go. So it tends to create a lot of pressure and discomfort.
And also, we have to keep in mind there are different grades of sprain. So we can have everything from a very mild sprain to grade 1 sprain, which literally you turn your ankle under, you've got some mild swelling for a week or so. You feel it bothers you to walk on it, but after a week or so, you've kind of forgotten about it and you move on and things generally go back to the way they were. Grade 2, grade 3, those are a little bit more. So in my case, there's a lot of weight coming down. Maybe I overstretched the ligament to such a significant degree that it led to more of that instability, but it was definitely not a grade 1. This took probably 6 or 8 weeks to fully heal.
Yeah, that's what
it was a long time.
Yeah.
So again, it just what it was. What's funny, I had the exact same thing happen about a year and a half later, coming down the same staircase, not paying attention. It was a staircase outside the house. I rolled my ankle under and I landed the same way. And I said, you've got to be kidding me. And sure enough, luckily I had the air cast, so I knew what to do. I put that back on and went about my business. And that one healed a little bit faster, probably 4 weeks instead of 6 or 8. It healed a little bit faster. So maybe it wasn't as extensive. I don't know. But I can tell you this. I've had 3 major ones because I had another one 10 years after that. Now I fail the drawer test every time.
Uh-huh.
I have significant instability still in that ankle, and you've seen my calves. I've got cows. I've got 18-inch calves. That's genetics. So I have a lot of strength there, which gives me enough support, enough stability. But I do fail the drawer test on that side, and it's pretty significant when you see how much travel that actually has. And if I
Uh-huh.
wasn't as strong as I am, I'd probably have a lot more instability. I
Right.
feel a lot more instability in the ankle.
Yeah. So that's one version. One thing I want to bring up here is sometimes what happens is that the peroneus, one of the peroneal tendons, which attaches
Mhm.
to the tuberosity of the fifth metatarsal, little bone that sticks off the back of your basically fifth metatarsal, your little toe bone, can actually fracture, can avulsion fracture, pop off of the bone. And the challenge with that is two things. One, it's just a little more serious. That definitely takes longer to heal
Mhm.
for sure. They don't usually repair that. They usually just kind of let things heal the way they do. But you'll have more pain. And if they take an X-ray right after you've had the injury, oftentimes there's enough swelling they don't see it.
Yeah.
So that one of the challenges with that is like if you got a client like Brian who really isn't getting better after an ankle sprain, because they typically have a pretty steady improvement. I mean, even if it takes some time, like every week will definitely make progress, if not like, just go away. So if that doesn't happen, and then you may want to just say, hey, to your client, go check that out. I wonder if there's a fracture going on in there that wasn't diagnosed. Or maybe they even haven't had an x-ray, like a lot of people don't. They just sprain their ankle and wonder why it's still bothering them kind of a lot 3 weeks later. And if you're the person dealing with them, say, hey, go check it out. I think there may be something else going on there that you should get a look at.
Yeah. I do wonder what percentage of people don't seek medical attention because it's gotta be very, very high.
It's huge.
Yeah.
I mean,
Is it
the estimates are again, this is estimates because they don't know if
I
they're
don't
not
know.
gathering data, they don't know what data they're not gathering, right? To be simple. But they sort of estimate that roughly 20 to 25% of ankle sprains are actually seen by a medical professional and
Oh,
probably
wow.
75% aren't.
Yeah.
And that was
A
rough. Who knows really? Because who knows? But that was kind of the estimate that they were going on, I think.
and I can attest the first time I went in, the next 2 times, I didn't go. I had my air cast still. So I just said, "Okay, I gotta wear this for a period of time. I gotta go back to strengthening." I never went in. So, again, I would have been one of those people that didn't, and there's a lot of them. I can't tell you how many clients I've had come in and said, "Yeah, I turned my ankle in the garden," or playing pickleball or
Yeah.
whatever. Lateral movement that's, uncontrolled. They just twist under, and that happens. It happens to, everybody or stepping off a curb or whatever.
I think I sprained mine 6 or 7 times, and I think I went to the doctor once, which was
Yeah.
really that first one, when I was on the trampoline and I was 12 and my mom was worried. But ever since then, I've never been to the doctor again because why? Like, I know what to do.
Yep.
So, a couple things. This is really where this isn't always a good thing, but rest, ice, compression, elevation for ankle sprains is the bomb.
It works.
It works. It's like it is something, put your foot up, put it up above your heart so you kind of decrease the swelling as much as you can. Um, Ice, there's a lot of controversy about ice, which we'll probably get into on one of our episodes, but I've certainly found for ankle sprains that it helps a lot. Like,
Mhm.
icing for 20 minutes, like once an hour for the first like day, if you can, makes a huge difference in terms of swelling. And particularly because the feet are at the bottom of your body and gravity is sending all the fluids down there,
Exactly.
swelling can be just a huge deal. And it really can be a lot of the source of discomfort.
Yep.
So rest, ice, compression. So the air cast for you, Brian, your basic ACE bandage.
Yep.
Something I've used really successfully in my last 2 or 3 ankle sprains is kinesio tape.
Mm.
So if you don't know what that is, it's basically it's a little like an athletic tape that has a little bit of stretch to it, and you basically use it to kind of support the tissues. What I found for me in 2 cases recently is that it decreased the swelling remarkably and decreased the pain remarkably.
Hmm.
So I don't know, there's a lot of debate about whether they work and why they work and what they do. But there was something about just, I think, how they support the area again, like an ace bandage, like an air cast, and also just compressing the area so that the fluid
Yeah.
can't blow it up like a balloon. That's really helpful. So, something, compression, and then elevation. So keeping it up as much as you can, which with your feet is hard unless unless
Yep.
you can like sit down somewhere and put your foot up. Like I know even for my clients who've had are frequent ankle sprainers, I've got a couple of those, and it's like, okay, so this is what you're going to do, and I talk them through, icing, compression, and then a lot of times I'll say when you sleep, if you can, put that leg up on a pillow.
Yeah.
Again, so just getting it higher up than your heart so that, again, that fluid can drain out overnight instead of collecting. So
And not only
that's
that, think about positioning in bed.
yeah,
That just having the weight of a sheet or a blanket pulling down the toes, and as you turn your body, I twist and turn throughout the night. I think most people do. That's gonna be some resistance to your ankle, and it may twist it into a position that it doesn't wanna go. So keep
right.
that in mind as well, that, elevating it may force you to stay more on your back. It helps with drainage. But if you can not cover that with the blanket, that can seriously help. That way you're not putting it in a position that can cause you more pain.
Yeah, no, and then exactly, and then take the blankets off, put a sock on if it's cold or it's winter or you're in, New Brunswick or whatever, but basically try to keep it open and mobile so that it's not being pushed. And I often also too find sometimes like it just needs to be exactly this position that's comfortable.
Mhm.
So if you need to pat a pillow here or take something from your couch and kind of organize it so that it's in a position that's comfortable, then do that.
Yeah. And I think when it comes to this, rice is the best thing, rest, ice, compression, elevation, because
Mhm.
it does need time to just heal. It needs time. If you start trying to blast it with exercises when it's still swollen, when there's still some pain and blood is still pooling in that area, you're not going to get anything out of it. You're only going to be basically irritating the tissues to a significant degree that is going to cause, a lengthened time of healing. So
Now,
sometimes you need to let it heal a little bit before you try and blast it from the experiences that I've had with clients.
yeah, and I go a little bit the other way, so because I
Okay.
mean, what I'll suggest to clients is not to the point of pain at all, but
Mhm.
keep that ankle moving gently within a
Oh, sure.
comfortable, thoroughly, entirely comfortable range of motion. And and I think of it as the six directions. So plantar
Mhm.
flexion and dorsiflexion, plantar flexion with an inversion and eversion, so kind of like you're waving your toes, your feet, basically, and then dorsiflexion with an inversion and eversion.
Mhm.
Whatever, or maybe even just little tiny circles or something. So, and usually doing that with the feet up. So like
Mhm.
supine with your feet in the air, just gentle circles, gentle movement, just things that again get the circulation going, remind the muscles of what they're supposed to do. And this is more appropriate for a more mild ankle sprain. Again, Brian, it sounds like yours are much more serious, and they probably did need a good, week or so of just not really much movement. But I
No,
know
I was
the
talking about I've had some people want to jump into things like calf raises
oh
or
yeah, no, no,
things
no,
that
no,
are
no.
way too aggressive, or even trying to put a TheraBand for inversion and eversion and
Oh
things
yeah,
like
no.
that. Mobility is great. I
Yeah.
think getting it to move in a safe environment, and I like what you said, lying on your back where gravity is not necessarily pulling down on it, whereas sitting off of a table or, sitting off of the Cadillac, gravity's pulling on it. Tibialis anterior is going to be working a lot on just gravity.
Yeah.
So doing it in a safe way is incredibly beneficial. And I think that that's going to definitely help. And also it helps to pull fluids out of it too.
Exactly. I mean, that's partly why, again, just mobility, non-resisted mobility, basically, right? Just
Mhm.
movement without resistance. But yeah, exactly. And especially again, if the feet are up, like you're lying on your back with your feet up, or they're over something and the feet are up, then gravity's going that way, and then you're making those calf muscles work,
Mhm.
and pump. And remember that that's how blood actually comes back from the lower leg, is through muscle activation. So if you get the leg muscles working a bit, that's going to start to pump that fluid back up into the rest of the body.
Yep.
So yeah, so the first week or so, it's like I'm not even really doing like weight bearing on the reformer or anything like that. Generally that first week, but I'm just doing a lot of mobility work and keeping the rest of the body kind of going.
Yeah. Yeah. And usually it takes about a week or so for things to calm down, even in a mild sprain, that you can begin to do a little bit of weight bearing. You can begin to
Mhm.
do a little bit of, and again, depending on who you talk to, I've worked with a lot of different physical therapists. Some want you to do more open chain type of work
Right.
with
Yep.
TheraBands,
Yep.
that sort of thing. I've had others who would rather work on stability and do more things like balance, 1 foot balance,
Uh-huh.
or both feet standing on wobble pad of some sort, RX or whatever you've got, uh, and doing something like that or marching on it just to get a little bit of the stimulation of the muscles of stabilization for the ankle. So those are different philosophies. And I think depending on who you're working with, one might be more successful than the other.
I would also say that, like, I don't do any of the standing balance work until they're comfortable weight bearing.
Yeah.
Like, really
Oh,
comfortable weight bearing, right? So then my first thing is always just mobility, maybe
hmm
some open chain, strengthening with a TheraBand, or even without a TheraBand, just going through the movements and then adding a TheraBand if that's appropriate. Then once that's all comfortable, the swelling is a little bit down, and they're able to walk relatively comfortably, like
hmm
maybe not perfect range of motion yet, but they're pretty comfortable in weight bearing and they can walk and stuff. Then I'll start to do some of the balance work and some of the more stability work. But regaining that stability in the lateral ankle, and we're assuming this is a rollover ankle sprain, which most of them are.
Yeah.
That's the critical thing, and that's something where my clients who didn't do that after a previous ankle sprain, that's where we run into trouble because
hmm
they didn't take the opportunity to regain that lateral stability, and then the likelihood of them rolling over again just increases because that ankle's less stable in that particular position. So particularly if I've got somebody who is doing any kind of running, cutting sport, or all my dancers, like, I kind of work on peroneal strength like mad,
Oh, yes.
at the appropriate point to get that super strong to allow those muscles to compensate for the lack of the ligamentous support and stability.
I also want to go back a little bit and reemphasize the mobility aspect because the other thing that I've found with this, and we're going to talk about Achilles tendon in a few minutes, is if things begin to scar up and you're
Mhm.
not working on mobility, you can actually begin to reduce the amount of range of motion that the ankle has naturally. The body wants
Exactly.
to stabilize. So it's going to say, no problem. I'm going to hunker down and I'm going to put as much scar tissue here as possible. So you can't do this to me again.
Yep.
And so it's going to really want to hold you in place. And if scar tissue begins laying down, it becomes much more difficult down the road to regain that. And again,
Yeah.
working with physical therapists, a lot of times they'll start doing some body work and some things to make sure that the scar tissue isn't forming. And they'll have me work with a lot of the mobility stuff, just having them work in all the different ranges of motion.
Because the other thing too is, a scarred up tendon may be stronger, but may be more brittle than a
Mhm.
non-scarred up ligament. Sorry, ligament. Right, and that's just something to think about. It's like if you're getting a whole bunch of scar tissue on there, that can also make it more likely that the next time you sprain your ankle, which again can happen,
Mhm.
you may then be really tearing it somewhere where you've got a lot of lumpy scar tissue and then the ligament. So you can actually get a worse tear sometimes if you really don't let that scar tissue form in an appropriate way to create a little bit of the mobility that you need. And you can
Yeah.
really, and once you lose some mobility in that ankle, it can be tricky. It's really hard to regain that. Things will get really blocked up in there.
And that may not be something that you would even notice at 25, 30, 35, but at
No.
65 or 70, that may rear its ugly head again if someone suddenly can't do dorsiflexion or plantar flexion nearly as well. And you realize that there really are one ankle works fine and the other ankle isn't working as much. And I've had that happen to a number of people, and it does affect their gait, it does affect different things. And you don't see it necessarily when they're young, but it may come back and you may begin to see things later in life. It's a possibility.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
I highly recommend focusing on that mobility aspect as well.
Yeah. So there's your basic ankle sprain, which again, most common
Yep.
thing. Many people will have it. Rest ice compression elevation. Start with mobility as soon as it's comfortable. Go into
Yep.
balance work. Then the next thing I want to talk about is Achilles
You want to do?
tendonitis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about Achilles issues because Achilles
Okay.
tendonitis is I think in your world, possibly more common than what I've seen. I've seen some cases, but I think in the dance world and things like that, it's probably a little bit more prolific. And this is just conjecture. I'm not 100% sure, but a lot of people don't go around on their toes or working on
Right,
their toes
right.
nearly as
Yeah,
much throughout the day. I'm just
yeah.
thinking I don't. So yeah, so Achilles tendonitis, we see occasionally, but not nearly as much as I think someone who is in more of a plantar flex state a lot might see it.
I mean, I actually, again, because of the dancer background, I've had a lot of clients with various tendinitises. And again, this is because of point work, it's because of all the footwork that happens, or even just being on the ball of your feet, and all the work that dancers have to do with their feet. They use their feet a whole lot more than the average person does. And it's not just dancers. This would also be what I think of as the artistic sports. So dance, gymnastics,
Mhm.
particularly dance, gymnastics. Some martial arts also use their feet a lot.
Yep.
So just things. Those are the three categories of people that I find. I get a lot of, like, I'll have tendinitises, not just in the Achilles, which is pretty common, but I get peroneal tendinitis,
Yep.
or tibialis posterior tendonitis is actually really common in a lot of people. That's not just a dancer thing. That's often a
Especially runners.
runners, and also just honestly
Sure.
deconditioned body thing that I found a lot with some of deconditioned clients. They get posterior tib tendonitis, and then they get plantar fasciitis, and that's can be really recalcitrant one. So tendonitis is an irritation of the tendon, right? And basically, it's usually, I would say, mostly, and there's always exceptions, but oftentimes it comes from, I think of as use beyond what that tendon can recover from, to
Mhm.
put it bluntly. So your typical thing is somebody takes up a new sport. In my dancers, it's like they start their point work, for example, or they're doing a lot of work up on the balls of their feet, more than they've been doing, or they are going to a dance workshop, so they're dancing 20 hours a week instead of 5. And that overuse, they don't allow those tendons around the ankle, and this is true in the knee and the hip and everything else too, to heal, right? Because most of the time we get a little bit of damage if we're pushing something beyond its usual limits, and then we let it rest for a couple of days and it heals up, and then we go back. And that's kind of how we build strength and how we build resilience a lot of times. But in this case, there's not the recovery time necessary. So then that scar tissue tends to build up, the inflammation tends to build up, and you get pain when you point your foot or flex your foot or circle your foot in various directions. And
Yeah.
for me, the key thing there is typically, so two things that I always think about with tendonitis, and particularly Achilles tendonitis, is I usually find that mobility is the first thing. That if I can get the muscles moving more, and I can get the range of motion increased, that alone will often decrease the discomfort. Because I
Mhm.
also find that tendonitis often goes with a lack of appropriate mobility in the area. So, gentle calf stretches, rolling out. This is where myofascial release is great. Doing rolling work,
Yes.
releasing the calf both, again, manually or with roller work, and then some gentle stretches, some gentle mobility work are all really, really helpful. And then once kind of the range of motion is reestablished, which usually means they don't hurt as much in as deep a, let's say, plantar flexion or dorsiflexion as they used to, then I start to work on strengthening, because
Mhm.
first I got to get the mobility working, and then I just strengthen like mad, to get them to be able to endure and recover from whatever their goal is, wherever they're trying to head. So I got to get that strong enough to be able to tolerate whatever craziness they're doing to it.
And keep in mind that with any of these ankle or foot tendinitises, any weight bearing, walking, all of it is going to cause some discomfort. So just keep that in mind that they may be limping for a little while. They may find it very uncomfortable. Uh, and it's something that they do need to rest. They do need to make sure that things do calm down, which is why mobility
Mhm.
work is great at the beginning, that you can really, almost go to town on that within their comfort zone, wherever their range of motion is relatively comfortably. But just keep that in mind that as soon as you put them into a weight bearing position, and we have to walk, we're not going to be, not many
Right.
of us, zoom around in wheelchairs all day long. So we kind of have to walk. And so, unlike the arm where you can sort of avoid using it, or the shoulder, with the foot, it's in use a lot more during the day. So just understand that it may take a little bit longer to heal because it's being used more often. It's being
Mhm.
sort of, you're poking the bear every time, you try and walk quickly to the car or, carry something in or whatever. So just keep that in mind. It may take a little bit more time than something like an, shoulder tendinitis or something where you can, avoid putting weight on it if you wanted to.
Right. And with all the tendinitis, again, it's mobility first and then strength. And one of the things that I see with every ankle issue that I ever work with is that most of the training that we do in Pilates or in personal training is designed for plantar flexion and dorsiflexion of the ankle. Again, unless you specifically do things that address the
Yep.
lateral and medial strength of the ankle, most of us don't. Like we get it implicitly and just trying to raise the foot up onto a plantar flexion and keeping the ankle balance. That gets some of the
Yep.
medial lateral strength going, but we don't address it directly for the most part, unless we're really
Yep.
specifically working on foot stuff. So that's also where I think we mentioned this on the feet earlier, because many people start with zero or really no work on their medial and lateral ankle, you do a little bit of work on that. Let's say not even with a TheraBand, just inversion and eversion work, or
Hmm.
waving the foot basically, and you can make some substantial progress because they haven't really ever addressed it at all. So
Yep.
again, a small amount of strengthening will often make big gains in an area which has not been addressed before. So with the
Yeah.
ankle, I want to work on plantar flexion, dorsiflexion for sure, but I also really want to work on medial and lateral strength is kind of the things that I find make the biggest difference and keep somebody from having ankle sprains again or decrease the likelihood of recurring tendinitis and irritation.
Yeah. And I like the way you said even just waving your foot. Everything from, you know, toe taps under your desks in various positions. And I do the up and over. So it's almost like you're doing an A. So, you
Yeah.
start a little internally rotated, lift up, a little externally rotated, a little internal, a little external, and just do that tap under your desk while you're on a phone or on a Zoom call. It's easy to do. Uh, I love doing alphabets, ankle alphabets, cross your leg and just draw the alphabet with your ankle. All of these things just get all of the muscles firing in every which way, every, range of motion that the ankle has. And like you said, how many times do we ever focus on our peroneals? It's not something that we're ever really talk about in a gym environment unless you've had an injury. And
Right.
then it
Exactly.
becomes, oh yeah, I need to work on that. And that's something that, of course, we tend to look at. And I'm sure working with dancers, you realize how important that is. But man, in fitness land, plantar flexion primarily is all they focus on. You may get someone talk about dorsiflexion, but you rarely hear someone talk about working the peroneals.
Right.
Rarely.
Yeah. And then even, I mean, inversion, we never do, right? Like they
Right.
never like, yeah.
Yeah.
So those are just some simple things there. One other thing about the Achilles tendinitis is I've had people who have popped their Achilles, who have torn their Achilles.
Yes.
A couple of tennis players and a couple of dancers, particularly that I can think of. And that's a whole nother story.
Hmm.
Um, the funny thing was they could still actually move their ankle because it's
Hmm.
not just the Achilles that does plantar flexion. There's a lot of assistance there, the deeper muscles, the toe flexors, and the peroneals and things like that. But man, that was a tough one. And the hardest thing about that was most of them got it. All the ones that I worked with were surgically repaired, and sometimes they do,
Hmm.
sometimes they don't. But getting full range of motion back, that was the challenge. And one
Yeah.
of them was a dancer who never really did. I mean, she really couldn't get her heel down, even in standing. Like her heel was always a little bit light on that injured side, which is a challenge. And a dancer, like you kind of got to get full range of motion in your ankle back.
Yep.
So that's just a more serious situation, and certainly that should be managed by the surgeon and the PT first, and then you're going to come into play when it's appropriate for that client and when they've been cleared by their medical professional.
This is one of the I find this an interesting area. In the surgery, they actually will take the tendon if it's a fairly clean tear, and they're just going to overlap it, suture it together. So they're literally shortening that tendon, which is why you
Hmm.
see such a decrease in range of motion.
Yeah,
So, and depending on how it's like, if it's a mop handle sort of thing where they're just those spaghetti strands, it's
yeah,
very challenging because how much do you overlap it not to affect the range of motion too significantly. And then after the surgery, this is one area where they actually want scar tissue. They
Yeah,
want that area to thicken up. You
exactly.
don't want to remove that scar tissue. You want
Mm-mm.
it
Hmm.
because that area will then, once that scar tissue is laid down after the surgery, it is stronger than it was before. It is going to
Right,
be a
but you gotta
very
let
strong
it get
area.
there, and then you
Got to
gotta work
get
on
there.
mobility, and that's the challenge.
That is
Once
always
scar
the
tissue is
challenge.
formed, it's like, okay. I mean, you can do a lot of manual stuff on it. This is where I've worked with one gal I remember who had an Achilles tear, not a
Mhm.
full rupture, but a significant Achilles tear. And basically what we worked on, and again, this is because I'm also a manual therapist and have other skills, but basically I would like go after that scar. This was years after, a couple years after the injury. I would go
Yep.
after that scar tissue, just like kind of friction massage with my thumb, kind of intently cross fiber. And then we would work it. And then we would like really like do plantar flexion, dorsiflexion with some resistance on the reformer in terms of footwork, and also on the tower in terms of the footwork on the tower. And then, and she did that. We did it about 3 times a week
Wow.
for 4 to 6 weeks, where, again, the friction massage isn't like 5 minutes. It wasn't a full, therapeutic session. And I'd work on her calf a bit and then a lot of friction massage on that Achilles. Then we'd work it. And then I always give her at least 2 or 3 days between sessions because I wanted things to kind of calm down, but not start to create scar tissue again. And
Yep.
that's one of those fine points. Every week, you're going to find I was starting back at the same point. We had to do at least twice a week to get progress, because within that week, that scar tissue would reform just like it was before, and we couldn't make progress.
Yeah.
And after about 6 weeks, she had pretty much her full range of motion back.
That's great.
So that was, that, and I've done that too with things like hamstring tendinosis, up at the sit bone, where we'll just, just work on it, work it. And then you do that every 2 or 3 times a week for 4 to 6 weeks. And sometimes you can actually really change the tissue structure, but that requires a particular person who knows what they're doing to kind of work with
Yep.
that. But with the Achilles, that was where I had some really good results a few times with this one particular client and a couple other clients after that.
Yeah. And again, we both have training in body work. Not everybody does. So if it's beyond your scope of practice, definitely seek someone
Refer.
out who can do this, refer out,
Yeah.
because if you don't know what you're doing, this is not some area to just let me try this. No. That is not your job and not your responsibility. So I always say a good physical therapist, a good manual therapist are great people to have in your back pocket where you can refer
Mhm.
at any time. It's great to be able to have that referral source.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I do find with both tendinitis and the Achilles tendon rupture that starting them out relatively light at first, and I love doing TheraBand, plantar flexion, dorsiflexion, and even doing small circles and things like that. So I'm generally hitting all the angles,
Mhm.
even just holding it, starting them out lighter rather than trying to push it because everybody wants to, sort of push that is a lot better. And what you're going to notice, especially with the TheraBand, is they're going to push down with because they still have some strength, and it's going to shake like
Yeah.
crazy.
Uh-huh.
Whereas, and that's when you see that shaking, a lot of times that's more of the stabilizing muscles trying to help out. If you just try and do plantar flexion and dorsiflexion in a standing position, the bigger muscles are going to help out. You're going to see a lot more compensation. So I find going lighter really gets those smaller stabilizing muscles to help out, to realize what their job is. The peroneals begin to help out. You get a lot more action starting lighter, and then you
Mhm.
can always work your way up.
So one exercise that is critical for this for me is on the chair. There's something called Achilles stretch on the chair, I think, or
Mhm.
calf stretch on the chair, where your knee is against the front edge of the seat, your foot is on the pedal, and you're basically pushing the pedal down, your plantar flexion, dorsiflexion with a bent knee. And one of the reasons that I want to bring that up is because one of the critical components of strength, another piece of the ankle strength, is getting a balance between the gastrocnemius and the soleus. Remember,
Mhm.
both the gastroc is a 2-joint muscle, covers the ankle and the back of the knee, and it's the superficial calf muscle, but it's attached to the soleus, which is just a 1-joint muscle deeper to the gastroc. Both of them come down through the same tendon, the Achilles tendon, onto the calcaneus, onto the heel bone. So one of the things that the soleus does specifically is it is our decelerator. And so if you think about running, if you think about walking, if you think about jumping, the eccentric phase of the soleus is what slows down that heel drop. Let's say we're running, right? That drop down, whether you touch the ground or not, depending on your running style, right? But it's the eccentric phase of the soleus that really cushions our landing. And what I found with a lot of ankle issues generally, and particularly when the Achilles is a problem, is there's an imbalance between the gastroc and the soleus. And in my experience, the soleus is often incredibly weak.
Yes.
So Brian is talking about that shake, shake, shake. I find like on that chair exercise that particularly happens on the eccentric phase for the soleus. So they can push down just fine, but it's releasing that you get the jutters coming up. And so working for me, that eccentric phase of the soleus, I know it's getting a little technical. And I'll do that for clients who are comfortable weight bearing just by having them stand up, hold on to a kitchen counter or a table or whatever, or the wall, whatever, bend their knees. They come into kind of like a little semi squat and then just raise and lower the heels, keeping their knees bent. And that's a double leg weight bearing version of getting the soleus going. And I don't care about the up, I care about the down. So it's like lift the heels up and I'll go like 1, 2, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 heels down, lift up. Because that's the quick part. They usually have the gastroc strengths or the strength to plantar flex, and then slowly we're lower to that eccentric phase.
Yeah.
And that's a really nice way to start to balance out the gastroc and the soleus, which I find is also useful for plantar fasciitis, which is, I think, our next topic.
That's our next topic. Yeah. I literally had a client today come in and say, oh yeah, I'm seeing my physical therapist about my plantar fasciitis. It was finally diagnosed. And, it's very, very common. It's a common injury and very common injury of the foot.
So plantar fasciitis, I think we've done a session on this earlier. So you're always welcome to go back and see what we said last time we talked about this.
Check out the archives.
So plantar fasciitis is an inflammation of the bottom of the foot, essentially the plantar fascia. And it can be caused by so many things and can occur for so many reasons. So going through a few of those for me. Brian probably has some of his own. My experience has been two things. Very common in people who have a very high arch and a very stiff foot.
Yep.
And so for those clients, especially and I've seen this happen so many times that this is my first answer for people, is if they have stopped, if their footwear has stopped being supportive. All right. So let's say they've, there's one particular tennis shoe that feels really good for them. That's what they wear all the time. And they've been wearing that same shoe for a year and a half, right? That's not uncommon at all. I know for me, I'm like that. They have broken down the foam. They have broken down the support under that. Like, absolutely. There's no doubt that they have. That's what happens after a year and a half in any kind of a shoe like that. And then their foot starts to hurt. And they said, especially when they stand or when they stand for a long period of time, or it's worse in the morning when they put their feet down on the ground when they first get out of bed. All those are kind of typical. And plantar fasciitis is really painful. And people just really, it bothers them a lot because they can't walk comfortably. The whole bottom of their foot feels like it's on fire, or the back of the heel feels like they're on fire. So, so for a lot of those clients, I'm like, okay, so change your footwear first. Like, I always start with that. Sometimes that alone will at least start the process of healing. So that's step one. Number two cause is generally weak feet, just really weak feet. Again, thinking about a similar client, another client, like they had those toes we kind of call hammer toes or mallet toes, where basically those knuckles pop up on the toes, and it's like their toes are kind of like a little claw. And that for me is a sure sign that the whole bottom of their foot is not very strong.
Yep.
Because in fact, like they're tight, but they're not strong underneath the bottom of their foot. So in that case, their arch is weak, their feet are weak, there isn't the strength, and so the plantar fascia is kind of taking that up. One
Yeah.
last thing is somebody who changes what they're doing. So somebody decides to start changing their
Mhm.
running pattern. Somebody says, "Hey, never let your heels down on running, or just do toe running," and they start to take that up with a vengeance, which runners do. And so then they're putting
Mhm.
different forces through that foot. Then again, it's used to, and that can start to irritate it as well. The plantar fascia is designed to kind of be the shock absorber. It's like a little trampoline, is how it's often described. Every step it stretches a bit and then it bounces back, and it stretches a bit and it bounces back. And sometimes that can cause micro tears and stress over time, and then that can lead to irritation.
When a client comes to you and says they think that they have it, I mean, definitely refer them to a physician, have them talk to their doctor.
Yeah.
But a sure telltale sign is that it hurts when they first stand on it. First thing in the
Yep.
morning, when they haven't been on their feet, they stand on their foot and they say, "It feels like I'm walking on broken glass."
Yep.
That is ticks all the boxes. But after 10, 20 steps, things calm down. That
Or a
that fascia
shower.
begins, or a shower, something
Yeah.
that it begins to stretch out just enough to take some of that pressure off. And they may not even really notice it for a while until they sit at their desk or in the car. And then they go to stand up again and, oh, it's there again.
Hmm.
That's that's the telltale sign of plantar fasciitis versus something else that's going on with the foot.
Yep.
Highly, highly recommend changing out your shoes. But I'm going to say something here. I have a lot of clients who are now getting into these super soft, super comfy shoes that don't really give your arch much support. They're like walking on a cloud. Now, for some people, they do that because it takes pressure off their knees, they say, or they have their reasons. I think they just want to be comfortable. Hey, who doesn't? You know? But if you're not getting any support in your shoe, you're not going to be supporting that plantar fascia. Think of the trampoline example. You actually want something in there to help the trampoline and not have it sag so much that you're going to, collapse it or tear it.
And I'm going to talk out of two sides of my mouth here. So take this as that, right? One of the big challenges, and I think about Nancy Myers every time I have this conversation. One of the big challenges with working with plantar fasciitis is fundamentally there is a lack of resilience and strength in the feet.
Mhm.
Period. Right. That's a lot of times why it is causing the trouble it's causing. The the quickest path to pain relief is to give that foot more support. So bigger arch support, or people have done taping, all kinds of different things, right?
Mhm.
Whatever, to decrease the stress on that plantar fascia, which is a good way to get pain relief. And sometimes that's all a client will be willing to do. The
Mhm.
challenge with giving the client more support, especially in terms of arch support, is basically that means that they're putting their foot in a cast, and that foot is
Mhm.
never going to get stronger. So this is where, and I've had enough clients where I really have two different approaches. If I
Mhm.
have a client who I know, or I'm pretty darn sure will not take this on as something that they want to actually work on and improve from a strength and flexibility perspective, there's a lot of clients like that. I'm like, go get some more supportive shoes, try a shoe that works, and then buy 3 pairs of that shoe and alternate them every week or two, so that they're basically that they're breaking down very, very slowly, and they're maintaining the environment of their foot
Mhm.
for a longer period of time. And that'll often decrease their pain, and that's a good way to do that. On the other hand, if I have a client who's a little more like, oh, I really want to solve this, then I'll say, okay, so here's a very simple foot program. We just do some basic foot
Mhm.
strengthening, some rolling out of the feet, some mobility work. Again, this will show up on our Instagram at some point. Just basic footwork, and basically say, if you're willing to commit to doing that, and it doesn't have to be every day, it can be like 2 or
Mhm.
3 times a week to get that strength going, and to have a less supportive shoe, so you're really actually having to use your feet during the day. That can be helpful. But again, I've got to decide, and I've got to work with
Mhm.
that client to decide which side of that fence they're on, because telling a client who is absolutely not going to ever do homework ever that, oh, they should just strengthen their feet, do these exercises, and knowing they're not going to do it isn't going to get them any relief,
Nope.
right? So that's where I walk both sides of that line, depending on my client and depending on their personality and their
No,
commitment.
100%. 100%. What I mean by a more supportive shoe, there are a number of shoes out there right now that are just way too soft, and they're not giving any support to the arch whatsoever. And I'm not saying we
Mhm.
need a arch support. I'm just saying you need a shoe that's going to support you for whatever your daily activities are, whether it is pickleball or tennis or golf, all the way down to they just want to be able to walk for a mile and a half a day just to get some cardiovascular,
Right.
conditioning going. Whatever it is, they need to have a shoe that's going to support them. And I always want to take a look at the ankle, making sure that the ankle looks aligned. It's not rolling
Yep.
out, not rolling in. So I want to make sure that they're using a supportive enough shoe so that it's going to support their habits, whatever they want to do for fitness. That being said, I do also like when they are in my presence or at home, beginning to strengthen the foot in ways where they can be standing without shoes on, where they could be standing. I love balance pads for this because it's soft enough that they can actually feel their entire foot, their toes, their arch, their heel, everything. They can feel it on there. And I want them to get more proprioception and begin to balance and begin to work the foot. And you're going to see a lot of shaking. You're going to see the foot trembling a little bit. I
Yeah.
love doing things like that because it's what they need. Now, I will say for me, the secret sauce for plantar fasciitis, I'm going to say two things. One, we had talked an episode ago or 2 episodes ago about the windlass mechanism, where the
Mhm.
plantar fascia goes up under the toes, and so every time you bend the toes back, you basically pull the toes back towards your knee. You're going to tighten out that fascia.
Yep.
Well, I find that just sitting cross my legs, pull that toe back, so I'm really stretching out that windlass mechanism, and just
Ah,
hold that, begins the stretching enough for these people that they
nice.
get that, okay, this is tolerable. It's not something that's going to be their whole body weight. It's just beginning that. And sometimes I'll say use your thumb and stroke the bottom of your foot, the arch, as whatever you can tolerate is fine. Then when I begin to stretch them where I have a calf board, I prefer a calf board. I'm not a big fan of just dropping a heel off of a
Yeah,
step.
I'm with you.
I like having the whole foot planted on something. So, and there's tons
Mhm.
of calf boards out there. You can look and find the one you like. But what I'll do is I will try and get their toe and see if I can dorsiflex their toe on the front side of that calf board so that they're stretching out the bottom of the foot and the toes are a little bit dorsiflex or they're a little bit pulled back toward the knee. They're extended. That I find is the secret sauce. And within a couple of weeks, they find that things have stretched out significantly and that they're a lot more comfortable when they're moving. Now, this is for someone who doesn't have an active tear in the fascia, that it's not
Yeah.
so torn that they obviously need the rest. This is someone who's doing the rehabilitation portion. But I find those two are huge supporters of plantar
Fantastic.
fasciitis. So,
Yeah, I haven't worked so much with stretching from the toes back. I've worked with stretching from the Achilles, right, on the other
mhm,
side, but not from the toes. I love that. That's great. That that
it really
that's something I'm
works.
gonna add right into my right into my repertoire.
Another way you can do that, and this is what I give people for homework because not everybody wants to buy a $50 calf board. Go up to a wall,
Yeah.
put your toes against the wall and slide them down so that they are, I'm doing this on YouTube, you can see this, so that the toes are pulled back, but I
Right.
want the knuckles to be on the floor. And
Uh-huh.
then I'm going to bend my knee and try and touch the wall.
Uh-huh. Yep.
So I'm
So you're
still
getting
getting
that
that stretch. I'm still getting the
soleus a
Achilles
bit.
stretch. You're getting the
Yep.
soleus a bit, but it's getting that Achilles to stretch and it's going to pull that plantar fascia as well. So that's one that they can do at home. They don't need any special equipment. It's nothing like that. Because there are very specific things. You go on any of these like Amazon or something, you're going
Yeah,
to see
there's a
these
ton of
Strasbourg
plantar fasciitis
socks,
things. Yep.
that you can wear at night that basically keep your toes in that extended position, pulled back all night long. It's super uncomfortable. It's super painful for a lot of people, and they're just not going to do it. So this is a way that I can get them into that position and say, okay, you can do this for 15, 20 seconds, can't you? All right, do it 5, 10 times a day. Hold it for 15, 20 seconds. Let it go. Hold it, let it go. And that's at least something that they're willing to do. And if I can get them to do it consistently, hey, more power to them.
Awesome. Awesome. Cool. Yeah, and then we just learn to work on like little toe curls and strengthening
Yep.
that too. But the flexibility is the key piece. And sounds
Yeah.
like it's the first piece for kind of pain relief Yeah, that you
Yes,
use? Awesome. That's great.
absolutely. And then, yeah, I think in our next episode, we're going to talk about strengthening the foot, strengthening the ankle. We're going to do actual
Mhm.
exercise programming. So stay tuned for that. So we're not going to get into a lot of that today, but we want to strengthen the foot. We want those intrinsic muscles of the foot. They need to be stronger because let's face it, for most of us, we got put into shoes at a very young age. Most people
Mhm.
did, and they're not comfortable going without shoes. But those muscles still need to be strengthened. So anytime, and again, in Pilates land, you guys train without shoes on. We don't in fitness. So for us to get them with their shoes off and get them on like I say, I love those balance pads that you can get them of various thicknesses and various, I have 7 or 8 of them out there that I know which ones are the softest and which ones are the firmest. And you can start at whatever's appropriate and just have them work feeling their feet, doing little small circles with their feet where the whole foot is connected, then marching, balance work, all of that just to train the bottom of the feet. And it does work.
Yeah, nice. Very nice.
So,
All right, so we talked a little bit about tendinitises, ankle
mhm,
sprains, a little bit of plantar fasciitises.
mhm.
Um, yeah, I think that's a pretty good
I think
roundup.
I think that's got most of it because I think there's a lot of things that come into the tendinitis camp. And I think, like you said,
Yeah.
when we talk about shin splints, that comes into that
Mhm.
a little bit. When we talk about the tibialis posterior, I've had a couple of people who suddenly start barefoot running and that begins to become irritated. So
Yeah.
I think a lot of that goes into the tendonitis camp. So I think we covered a lot of things today. If we did forget something, though, do us a favor, email us, movingcombos@gmail.com and let us know because, you know, in our mind, we're like, we're trying to think right now. We're trying to rack our brains, but and nothing's popping in, right away. So if you're thinking of something, or if there's something that you'd like to request and say, oh, I have a client with this, let us know. We'd love to hear. And that way we can talk about it or at least answer you and, you know, hit it directly. So,
Perfect.
and again, movingcombos@gmail.com is the best way to get in touch with us. And do us a favor, hit that like and subscribe button. We really appreciate it. It helps us out so much. You have no idea. Uh, and share, 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 share. Let people know about us. We always love to have new listeners and people are discovering us. And it's funny because you have this happen a lot. I have this happen a lot when we're at conferences or teaching courses, and people come and say, I love your podcast. And then other people are like, you never told me about that. And I'm like, tell them, tell everybody. So please do us a favor, share alike, and hopefully some things that you learned from us, you can start working with your clients and help them. So that's really the goal for us.
That's why we're here.
That's why we're here. So until next week, where we talk a little bit more about exercise programming for Nora St. John, I'm Brian Ritchie. We will see y'all next week.
Bye, guys.